learning about classical works, Zhou Mengfu pioneered the restoration of ancient Chinese art. Nicolas Poussin promoted the classical beauty of ancient Greece and Rome, launching a wave of classical paintings in France. The former was a master of Chinese painting. The latter was considered a father of French painting. What did they comprehend from their respective traditions? In French history, 3 young men from different eras travelled from Paris to Rome in Italy in search of inspiration. Through their efforts, European classical art regained its glory. They were Nicolas Poussin, Jean-Louis David, and Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. In China's Yuan dynasty, Zhou Mengfu immersed himself in copying the paintings and calligraphic works of earlier dynasties. Years later, his follower, Dong Qichang, finally pushed the cultural restoration movement to its climax. Then one day, an Italian called Giuseppe Castiglione came to China's Forbidden City. Chinese people were able to see the 3-dimensional Western painting style. 2 diverse painting traditions met each other for the first time. Art masters from both cultures believed that they could develop new styles from traditional sources. Signs of their attempts can be found both in the Forbidden City and the Louvre. The post-17th century French paintings displayed in the Louvre were mostly influenced by Poussin. Poussin's own painting style derived from ancient Greece and Roman traditions. Poussin's self-portrait shows a strict and determined man. It was this determination that took him to the most glorious peak of his painting career. Poussin was born in 1594 in Normandy. When he was young, a passing painter discovered his talent for painting and led him to the world of art. At 18, he left his home and went to Paris to paint. When he was 30, he headed to Rome, which, in his dreams, was the city of art. In Poussin's era, Rome and Florence were the art centers of Europe. Artists from different countries came like pilgrims to pay their respects to their masters' works. Here, the ruins of ancient Greek and Roman styles, as well as Renaissance statues and paintings, can be found everywhere. Their beauty of harmony, balance, and simplicity originated from ancient Greek art. Poussin was one of the pilgrims, hoping to absorb some of the ancient artistic elements. 90 years later, in 1715, Italian Giuseppe Castiglione came across the sea to China. As the Chinese emperor began to appreciate the Western characters painted by Castiglione, classicism in painting, advocated by Poussin, was also gaining in popularity. Paris became the new art center of Europe. Chinese painter Chen Danqing shared similar experiences to Poussin and Castiglione. he went to the Western world to explore art and life. In Western museums, Chen saw the works of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, Rembrandt, and Poussin.
我是画西画的，喜欢整个西方的绘画传统。那我到了美国以后，我就很满足，我都看到了。可同时，这一切会提醒我，就是我来自另外一个传统。
Chen also saw many Chinese paintings in foreign galleries, something he hadn't been expecting.
我认识中国的山水画，迷恋它。这个过程是在国外发生的。一个是我出国时候，大量的画册还没有出现，收藏还没有公开；另一个就是我没有料到美国和欧洲会有这么多中国古典山水画收藏。
Among the Chinese paintings Chen saw were the works of Zhou Mengfu. Later on, Chen learned that Zhou, Poussin, and he were all trying to look for a way to develop themselves in the ancient classical tradition. In the Palace Museum, there's a traditional Chinese painting showing a bamboo grove. A middle-aged man dressed in a long white gown stands to the right. He was a senior official, but why was he dressed like a hermit from the countryside? Zhou was born in 1254 in Huzhou in southern China. Calligraphers Wang Shizhi, Wang Xianzhi, Yan Chenqing, and literary giant Su Dongpo all worked there at one time. They are among the greatest masters of art and literature in Chinese history. In the Yuan dynasty, 8 cultural figures appeared in Huzhou. Zhou was one of them. Huzhou was therefore known as the center of classicism during the early years of the Yuan dynasty. Some modern scholars even call it the Florence of China in the 13th century. During the 13th century, China witnessed a great historical event. The Mongolians destroyed the Song dynasty. Many scholars were supporters of the Song dynasty and refused to work with the Mongolian rulers. Zhao's identity was even more complicated. He was a member of the Song dynasty's imperial family, but became an official of the Yuan dynasty. He was despised by other scholars for this decision. It bothered him for the rest of his life. Nevertheless, as an official, Zhou gained access to the calligraphic works of earlier dynasties. With the hope of restoring the ancient art traditions, he copied these classical works over and over again.
赵孟頫每天都要临一遍《兰亭序》，每天啊，你想想看，那《兰亭序》字数不多，但是中国书法的一个经典，所以他每天要这么弄一弄，意思就是说，我要回到我的一个起点，然后再往前走。但我相信他每一次临《兰亭序》都是不一样的。
By copying classical works, Zhou pioneered the restoration of ancient arts during the Yuan dynasty. Poussin promoted the classical beauty of ancient Greece and Rome, ushering in a tide of classical painting in France. The former was a master of Chinese painting. The latter was considered the father of French painting. What did they comprehend from their respective traditions? Lavoisier is a researcher of French classical paintings. He speaks about the ancient traditions that influenced Poussin.
L'enlèvement des Sabines, c'est un tableau de Poussin, c'est d'abord un tableau d'histoire. C'est un tableau qui raconte une histoire qui figure chez l'historien romain.
This painting tells an ancient story. After the famous Trojan War, the Romans settled in Rome. Finding wives became a priority for the soldiers. The founder of Rome, Romulus, held a celebration to attract the nearby Sabines to the square. It was said that Romulus suddenly spread his cloak on the ground at the Forum. Seeing this signal, the Roman soldiers dashed towards the Sabine women and carried them away. This is the story depicted in the painting. Rubens, another painter even more famous than Poussin, depicted similar scenes in his paintings. In the painting, Rape of the Daughters of Leucippus, he illustrated the moment of emotional release in a wild and passionate way. It's been described as plunging into a sea of female bodies and swimming in it unscrupulously. At that time, many painters showed scenes of happy, everyday life with a strong religious influence. Rubens was the most famous. The chubby and fleshy women in his paintings are especially impressive. With a strong sense of motion and very imaginative stories, his paintings are magnificent and delightful. Unlike Rubens, Poussin was more serious, rigid, and a stronger adherent to tradition. He looked to Roman historians for subjects to paint. The architecture depicted in his paintings was all a product of his careful research into ancient Roman architecture. Each character had his or her prototype in ancient Roman artifacts in museums.
蒲桑当时迷恋的是古希腊和文艺复兴绘画里的均衡感的那一部分美学，所以他的造型其实都是从古希腊雕刻和古希腊的平画那儿过来。
Voir comment le manteau rouge de Romulus rime avec le manteau rouge du personnage qui fuit de ce guerrier romain qui est en train de prendre son élan pour cet enlèvement. Le cheval blanc à gauche et le cheval blanc à droite se recomposent.
This created a special effect. Although the topic is one of violent plunder, the painting is not filled with conflict, horror, and anger. In fact, it looks rather solemn. It seems like the characters are frozen, like relief patterns. The women's marble-smooth skin presents a striking contrast against the soldiers' bronzy skin. It looks very much like a typical scene of European classical drama.
所以画画的看画，它有个毛病，就是他真的不太在乎这幅画的题目、这幅画的故事。我在乎的是这么多人他怎么放的这么舒服、这么好看啊！因为你画画，你就会知道，这幅画上要出现，比方30个人，可你放的好，就像有100个人一样。你数数，其实没有100个人。那么还有就是主要人物和次要人物，还有背景上的人物，还有这么多人物跟背景什么关系？ 这是最难的一件事情，也是最有意思的一件事情，啊，那蒲桑可能给了后代所有人一个经典，就是你要想画这么一个大场面，你怎么把它放进这个方框子里面去，放得好看，啊，那这个蒲桑的构图是。
The warm red colour spreads from the rooftops to the leaves and tree trunks and beyond. The island in the middle stretches to the lower section of the painting, like an unfolding palm, inviting visitors to walk into the world the painter has created.
但你仔细去看他的画的树，而且当中的很多灌木丛，他直接追董源那个传统啊。董源比他宏富，比他大气辽阔。
Dong Yuan was a well-known painter in the 10th century. In these paintings, said to be Dong's work, we can see similar composition to the autumn colours on the Zhou and Huan mountains. They all depict scenes of lakes and mountains shrouded in clouds and fog. In another painting, said to have been painted by Wang Wei in an earlier period, we find characters, mountains and houses in a similar style to the autumn colours on the Zhou and Huan mountains. If Zhou was learning from his predecessors, what was his personal style?
他不是那么在乎这自然界的细节而是在乎在表达这些山水树草的时候，这种笔致墨韵上的变化，真的是跟古代的画比就推进了一大步。
Zhou believed that it was crucial to include traditional elements in paintings. Otherwise, the painting was no good, no matter how exquisite it was. This was the essence of the cultural restoration movement he had been advocating. Zhou advocated the use of traditional elements, as opposed to the meticulous and realistic painting style of previous periods, like the painting Golden Pheasant and Cotton Rose Flowers. In Zhao's Hupo on Bamboo, the bird was painted in a more concise way, with a sense of classic beauty.
赵孟頫那儿，你不要去找自然，你要去找他们对自然的这种态度。他在自然里面看到的是笔墨看到的是局面。
Emperor Qianlong of the Qing dynasty loved the painting Autumn Colours on the Zhou and Hua mountains. It was said that he even went to visit the two mountains, only to find that they were actually quite far apart, not as close as depicted in the painting.
我并不是真的要到山水里面去走，我一天到晚要坐在山上看，然后我才能画画。不是的，我只要看到前朝的画，我在我的屋子里我就能画山水，所以一山一石一树一草对他们来说是一种笔墨的一个理由。
Living in a different culture and with different traditions, Poussin did similar things in his paintings. Is this work of his a truly realistic painting?
在菩萨那儿也有这个情况，比方说他画的时候，很多背景其实是他假想的一个希腊的背景。 然后前景是人物，其实就是很主观，这一切都经过刻意的安排。
Such deliberate design or arrangement occurs in this painting too. In The Shepherds of Arcadia, Poussin demonstrates his philosophical thinking. To the ancient Europeans, Arcadia was a heaven on earth. In the painting, we see 3 young shepherds and a young lady in front of a tomb. On the tombstone, the words, "My Arcadia," are carved.
Alors, il y a beaucoup d'interprétations de de cette phrase, mais en gros, elles se ramènent toutes à cette idée que même dans l'endroit le plus joyeux, le plus florissant, le plus agréable de la terre, le pays de tous les bonheurs, eh bien, la mort existe, c'est-à-dire que tout a une fin, que le bonheur n'est pas éternel.
Poussin infused his critical thoughts about death in his paintings. Although, as the chief painter of the French king, he was given a luxurious home and a high salary, he felt he was losing the freedom to paint and was surrounded by jealous eyes and devious plots. A year later, he returned to Rome and never set foot in France again.
Et en France au XVIIe siècle, Poussin va être leur modèle. Ils n'acceptent pas d'être considérés comme des artisans, mais ils disent « nous avons des choses à dire exactement et à formuler exactement comme les poètes dans les poésies ou dans les pièces de théâtre peuvent le faire ». Donc le peintre passe du statut d'artisan, d'ouvrier mécanique, comme on disait alors, au statut d'intellectuel et de poète.
On one of the ceilings of the Louvre are painted France's 4 historical periods and their most famous artists. Poussin is seen among these artists. The awakening of painters was a continuation of the awakening of humanity since the Renaissance, leading France into a golden age. From that time onwards, France replaced Italy as the center of European art. Poussin was certainly a pioneer.
他在学意大利文艺复兴艺术的时候，他画出了法国人自己的一个气质。此后就法国画家追随他，有了他才有了后来我们知道的这法国绘画传统。这就跟赵幕府的地位很不一样了。到赵幕府的时候，中国山水画最伟大的时代已经结束了。
Unlike Poussin, Zhou faced a dilemma. He was accused of being a traitor to the previous dynasty, while all the traditional values had been overturned in the new dynasty. In the circumstances, he hoped to restore the old traditions through his efforts. He had once written a poem to show how he was thinking. Part of the poem reads, "It is a herb when growing in the mountains, but a common grass outside the mountains. I only hope to spend my life in the mountains." Throughout his life, he was tortured with the hope of being detached from the world and by the reality of staying in it. This was also expressed in his painting Water Village.
"那么一大帮文人、知识分子、艺术家，他得找一个出口，这个出口是安全，同时能够让他忘记痛苦啊，能够活下去啊，能够继续做他的创作。
In other words, at that time, Chinese artists had to choose between working for the court or withdrawing from society and becoming a hermit. Zhao's advocacy for ancient painting traditions brought new life to a declining art world. Painting fashions changed from the meticulous to the natural and simplistic. In terms of poetry, Zhou abandoned the sorrowful style and adopted a more optimistic form. In terms of music, he researched the origin of the Chinese zither and revitalized the Chinese music world. He learned from Huan, a master of Chinese calligraphy, and developed his own style. His writings are still used as models for calligraphy today. The restoration he advocated covered all forms of art. From Zhou Mengfu to Dong Qichang, Chinese painting had entered its heyday, becoming a way for scholars to express personal feelings. This can be traced back to the restoration movement advocated by Zhou.
我自己是画家，我知道，其实你在乎的是前人怎么勾的啊，然后我能不能像他一样，我能够勾出我自己的样子来，在菩萨。
Poussin's classical paintings are highly regarded in France. There's even a school called Poussanism at the French Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture.
Pour la France, celui qui fait le lien entre l'Italie et la France, c'est Poussin, qui est né en France, mais qui est un peintre italien. C'est-à-dire qu'il a passé l'essentiel de sa vie en Italie.
Poussin est donc retenu comme le grand maître du classicisme en France, et il a influencé les peintres de ce qu'on appelle les académies. Il a été un modèle, mais il n'a pas été le professeur réel.
100 years later, when Jacques-Louis David studied at the Royal Academy, he too was influenced by Poussin. In winning the Rome Prize, David had sought out the ancient classics from Paris to Rome, just as Poussin had before him. Later, David painted the intervention of the Sabine women, based on the story depicted in Poussin's painting, The Rape of the Sabine Women. The Romans had children with the Sabine women. Seeking revenge, the Sabine men launched a war against the Romans. Seeing that their husbands, children, and fathers and brothers were fighting each other, the Sabine women rushed to stop the conflict. The dramatic scene is touching and passionate. Yet David cared more about how to freeze the moment. The painting's most powerful strength comes from the sculpture-like characters. It seems as if they are sculptures of ancient Roman heroes. Another master of classical painting from the school of Poussanism was Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres. He had also won the Rome Prize and had gone to Rome. He was obsessed with the Renaissance painter Raphael. The model for his painting, The Vow of Louis XIII, was Raphael's Sistine Madonna. Some contemporary critics said the imitation was meaningless. Yet Ingres thought the opposite. He said, "Look, who is there among the great men who has not imitated? Nothing is made of nothing. And the way good inventions are made is to familiarize yourself with those of others." The painting La Grande Odalisque was one of his bold attempts. At the time, people criticized the main character for being disproportioned, having at least 3 more vertebrae than ordinary people. And in the painting La Source, the female's body is at least 2 head lengths longer than normal women. Yet, Ingres said, such adjustment was in accord with the classical elegance in his eyes. David and Ingres continued to explore Poussin's classical painting techniques. To posterity, their painting style is known as neoclassicism. Chen Danqing also developed his understanding of art through years of painting and observing. He said that he had not truly understood Dong Qichang, a follower of Zhou, until the age of 50.
董其昌是个前卫画家。欧洲人有一句话形容这个Velázquez， 就是马奈形容，他说他是画家里的画家，就他的画是画给画家看的，画家才能懂他的画。
Chen Danqing thought that Dong's landscape paintings covered all the features of Chinese painting through different dynasties. So he regarded Dong as a painter who recorded Chinese art history through his paintings. Whether Poussin, David, Ingres, Zhou or Dong, these are just a few examples of people learning and innovating from tradition.
我最近在哲学家萨伊德的书里面发现一个词，叫 inventio， 是创新的拉丁文的原意，而它的原意并不是指创新，而是指返回和利用过去的资源，找到一个新的可能性，或者说回到古希腊、古罗马的一个气氛当中，在这个返回的过程当中，你用你的智慧、你的想象力、你的表现力，这个叫做创新。
On one side in front of Chen are the paintings of Chinese masters like Zhou and Dong. On the other side are paintings of French classic masters like Poussin, David and Ingres. On one side is an artistic tradition carried on through ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the Renaissance and Classicism. On the other side are Chinese ink and wash paintings. We can't help wondering, are they connected in some way?
艺术是不相同的。如果你在画油画，你面前放了一张赵孟頫，它不会对你有帮助。 你如果是画山水画的，你前面搁一张菩萨，对你没有用，它是两个系统。那你可以说最高境界上它是相通的或者怎么样，但问题什么叫做境界？它是排斥的，完整的一个文化系统，它是其实又是排他的。
Eugène Delacroix expressed passion through death and slaughter, yet he was actually a quiet person. Xu Wei called himself Man of Ivy, but he was as irritable as a tiger. Both Delacroix and Xu created a passionate era, and each was regarded as the forerunner of Romanticism in their own country.